Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iturrate, and the MMA detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy. Okay, welcome back, Lytes Out Podcast fans, listeners, smart people. Here with Mike, Miguel, as usual. And you can see a third face, a fourth, I guess, including mine. But hey, this is our favorite thing to do. We've talked about it many times. You know what it is. Deep dives. Yes, we have another 50 Fight Club member right here. Not only that, but a fellow Hoosier. So he's smart, handsome, rugged. Something like that. I don't know.
Burly.
Keith Wisniewski. Keith, what's happening, buddy?
Not much, brother. How are you? Quite the intro.
Doing great, man. I haven't seen you in a while. Like I said, it was a great time back in the day. Olden times, we used to get to train together some. It was always a good experience. But you, like me, you're a 50 Fight Club member. I don't know if that's even what it says on the internet, though, because the internet's going to be wrong. They don't have like about 15 of my fights. What about you, Mike? What do you got? Can you run us through his career a little bit?
I can tell you Keith's first recorded fight was in 1998 against Joey Gilbert. Is that correct, Keith, or is that wrong?
No, that's not actually my first fight. My first fight was against a gentleman named Jason Powers on Extreme Challenge Trials 2. It was in 98, but I believe it was maybe 2 months prior to the Gilbert fight.
Okay, so how many fights do you have before the Gilbert fight then? Just one, or is there more?
3. I fought a 4-man tournament after the Powers fight. I won the first, lost the second. So Gilbert was my 4th fight.
Okay, so did you win Powers?
I lost a split decision to Powers, and then I fought a local gentleman I actually ended up training with later named James O'Connor. And then I actually fought, and I'm sure Miguel will know this name, I fought Wes Collins in my 3rd fight.
Okay, now,
how old were you at the time there?
16.
So was this like a promoter not doing his due diligence? Did you come with like a fake ID from like the flea market? Use your brother's ID? How does this happen?
It was definitely the Wild West of MMA there at that time. I don't think I'm the only fighter that was fighting before he was 18. But yeah, just parents signed a waiver and let me fight. It wasn't really, to me, people talk about it like it was some big thing, but in the moment, it didn't seem like a big deal.
Okay, so your parents.
Wait, let me ask, how does that go down, Keith? You come home, like you got the printout ready, like and put it in front of Dad, and he had a good day at work, so he signed it.
Or did you say he's in the car? Let me go get it right now, and then you go and sign it and you bring it back.
He said okay.
See, I'll take the last wild guess. Keith went to Mom. I bet you he got a soft spot. Mom signed it. Dad didn't know.
That's not a soft spot. That's Mama wants to get her kid hurt.
Yeah, your mom wanted you hurt.
Up. Yeah.
But Keith, take us through that first signing, your dad's signature.
So actually, the first time that my brother and I are kind of self-trained, so we go out in the front yard and practice, and that's put boxing gloves on, and eventually we decided we wanted to compete. So the first time we fought was in '97. Justin fought in like a 16-man tournament, and they didn't let me fight because I was 15 at the time. So, but my dad went out there. My dad went out there to watch, and I went out to corner my brother. And then the second Extreme Challenge at Monty Cox's kind of amateur feeder show at the time, he let me compete. And
did you pay to compete?
What's that?
Did you pay to compete?
Yeah, it was $25 entry fee, and then I think it was like $40 to buy the VHS tape afterwards. So
that's money. That's a money.
Well, that's kind of like you go to Disney, you spend like $300 to get your fast pass and get into the park, and if you want any pictures from the rides around it, you're not able to take pictures of yourself on an extra $20. So was there a lot of crowds at this point, or was it not that many people there?
That fight was at a sports bar in Davenport, kind of a big sports bar, and there probably were, I don't know, 600-700 people. I mean, it wasn't.
So in other words, the entire card was paid for, but the promoter needed your $25.
I suppose so. Yes, I think you made out all right on that.
And the likelihood of insurance existing at that time, being that you're under 18 and actually covering you, probably pretty low. Am I correct?
I think you're probably mistaken on that. Although I fought in a ton of fights where it was just a waiver, but in Iowa, I believe the athletic commission was already involved in the sport. So I mean, they were it wasn't a real professional commission, but I'm pretty sure Iowa was one of the first states that ever started sanctioning fights.
I have a question. Why'd you go over to Iowa for a fight instead of? I mean, they were having a fight in Indiana.
Well, there weren't. I mean, you probably remember this. There weren't a ton of fights in Indiana, So
okay, but there was Finkies.
No, not at that time. I mean, Finkies was probably 2 years after that. 3 years after that.
Well, Keith, I'll tell you. The first time I heard of you was when you fought Wes, because Wes Collins was a hook and shoot guy from our organization. He was a pretty, for the time, I'm pretty sure he was at least like a blue belt, with like the official blue belt kind of thing. So he was a pretty good guy, for the time. And that kind of got you on the map. But then, I had the time where I was a tape collector kind of thing. And I remember getting a tape of you fighting, and it's a weird white ring with one camera shoot from above with like the ring announcer actually doing play-by-play live for the crowd. Like, what the hell?
That Bob Shermer show?
What was that?
No, I'm pretty sure that's the Fearless Freestyle Fighting Championship. Sure, and I can't believe you got that tape. I mean, you must really. Yeah, FFFC or whatever they call it.
Now that you say it, that is exactly what it was. Like 3 Fs or something like that. I remember.
Where was it at?
So it was in Fort Wayne. I fought twice there. I fought in FFFC or whatever it was. I fought there in their second show and their third show. I did a tournament. So.
Okay, so that's wow. So Miguel, you actually that might be like a holy grail item. Like there's certain items in MMA, like the Yama pit fighting. Like if I ever see a Yama pit fighting shirt, dude, that bad boy's riding. No, I don't even care if it's a small. That'd be a belly shirt. I'm wearing that bad boy. So who was the promoter of that?
Ooh.
I'm pretty sure Guy Hinton promoted that, if I remember correctly.
That's a name from the blast from the past. But,
yeah.
But here's the thing is like Keith obviously is one of the standouts on the show. His brother, but there were good fighters on that show. Like there were guys.
Well, Indiana, that Northwest Indiana is kind of a hotbed. Like especially around that time. Like if you look at the 135-pound weight class. In the top 5, you had 3 people within driving distance of each other in the top 5, literally in the world. So, yeah. So that's kind of the area. Like there's some bad boys in Northwest Indiana, and a lot of them have moved out, and we're gonna get to it. Like I've got those questions later on that we'll get to. So why don't I start? All right. So Keith, you and I know each other. Obviously, we promoted shows together. I haven't talked to you in a long time, but. At the end of the day, like we've got a relationship, where I could call you, you definitely pick up. So it's kind of a different relationship than our other ones. Mm-hmm. But in essence, on this podcast, usually Miguel and I use Chris Lytle's friendship in order to lure people over here to ask like really kind of like questions that really kind of dig into them. And like we had Brandon Lee Hinkle call up Wes Sims going, "Don't go on that show. They know everything. Don't do it, dude. It's not a normal show." And, Keith, we got Chris having the excuse of, "Oh, well, they're just kind of like my friends and they're fans. And they ask the questions." Meanwhile, we're fully prepared and we know where, the uncomfortable questions are coming from. And it's usually stuff that, happens backstage at an event or getting stiffed or something of that nature. With you, however, I'm just going to be upfront. We pretty much, you're going to be getting hit with stuff that normal interviewers don't get asked, and I don't think you're going to flinch at a single one.
I would expect nothing less.
Right. Yeah. There's no cheating. There's no cheating in this. All right. So in 1998, your first recorded fight is a split decision loss against Joey Gilbert. At that time, how old were you, and how did that fight come about?
I was 16. So I had been completely
He had a lot of fights at 16.
And wait, let me add this caveat. Joey Gilbert is the first wrestler from the state of Illinois to win 4 state titles. He also fought He went on to fight in the UFC. He fought BJ Penn. He got stopped with like 1 second left in the first round, but at that point, no one had made it a minute with BJ Penn. Everyone that like lost to him in under a minute got a second shot at the UFC. They didn't allow Joey to have that opportunity. So your first fight's against an absolute stud. Were you aware of that walking into this?
Not really. I mean, no. I mean, I didn't even know the name. I obviously I got a ton of respect for both the Gilbert brothers. Now we're pretty good friends, but no, it's just back then you just kind of showed up and fought whoever they put across from you. It wasn't nearly as organized.
So how does that fight come about?
So I've been self-trained for my first 3 fights, but I actually started training at a gym. A gentleman, he still has, I think, a gym here in the area. Pat Robinson kind of opened his own place, and then some of the guys.
So he's a black belt now. Is he?
Yes.
What was he then?
I think he was a brown belt then. Don't quote me on that.
Wow.
Maybe I don't know. I don't really know.
He also competed though. He was like an active competitor from back then.
No, he's legit. He's legit. Patrick Robinson's legit. Yeah, no, I respect him. He's got a gym in Valparaiso now. It's just strictly jiu-jitsu, but he's legitimately a very good teacher. So go ahead. I apologize. We keep cutting you off.
So like I said, Justin and I were self-trained. Patrick was more formally trained. James O'Connor, who I actually fought, we all started training together. Jeremy Morrison, and then kind of a group of guys started training together. And Duneland eventually kind of split off from that. We kind of wanted to train harder, I guess would be the best way to describe it than what. Not that they didn't train hard, but it's competing at a high level in MMA isn't really martial arts. It's more of a sport, and that's kind of how we wanted to treat it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So they offer you Joey Gilbert. Was this like something they made at the event? Because a lot of times these fight cards, like now you have a full training camp, you know who you're talking to. Do you just show up at this event and they offer you Joey Gilbert, or how does that line up?
So I think I knew I was fighting him prior, but back then, at least for me, in my experience, I was fighting almost every month. So I fought in February in that tournament. Then in March, I fought the next tournament against O'Connor and Collins. And then April, I'm fighting Gilbert. And then May, I'm fighting in a tournament against Jeff Curran. It's just kind of one of those, you just show up and fight whoever's across from you type of deal.
Okay, so you walked into this 1-3 then.
What's that?
You were 1-3 going into Joey Gilbert.
1-2.
1-2. Okay. Yes, you. All right. Okay. At any point, is any of your parents or somebody that cares about you trying to talk you out of this, or is it just fueling the fire?
I didn't really get discouraged. I think to some degree, at that age and competing against, especially in like Joey and Jeff Curran's case, they were pretty decorated already. Joey was a collegiate All-American. I'm a sophomore in high school. It's a fight that I think most people expected me to lose. And even though I lost a split decision, that fight could have went my way. I actually had him in a triangle where he literally pulled himself out. We both fell out of the ring. That's back when everyone fought in ring at the cages. So it wasn't like I got steamrolled. The Jeff Curran fight was a really, really close fight. I think it was unanimous, but it wasn't like a one-sided fight.
Where was the Jeff Curran fight at? Because that's obviously not on your record.
No, that was at a place called the Brat Stop on the border of Illinois, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So in these fights, are you taking much damage? Are you coming out with cuts or not really? So it's like, is it, what I mean?
I've never seen a Keith Wisniewski fight without a cut.
I was a younger Keith with a little thinner skin, I guess, or thicker skin.
Less scar tissue.
Yeah.
Let me ask you here. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of this thing, okay? Keith Wisniewski versus Joey Gilbert's not a bad fight here.
It sounds irresponsible, doesn't it?
How much of that money do you still have left that you got paid for that? You had to have been paid a fortune. How much were you paid, brother?
So of the $100 I received in compensation, I spent 90 that day celebrating, and then 10 I rolled over in an IRA, and I'm hoping to retire on that.
There we go.
Good plan.
What you did was you probably bought the first Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you're a billionaire. All right, that's good, Keith. That's good. That's good.
My time.
All right, so at that event,
100%.
you also had Matt Hughes
I
in that
was
locker room. Were you aware of like who Matt Hughes was at the time? Because he fought on that. He had a huge slam. I think he fought Eric Snyder, split him open.
So that wasn't actually that night.
Oh, okay.
That was the next show that. So I fought on. I believe that was Goitia. The show I fought on was Goitia's first show ever.
Okay.
And then the second show he was going to promote, he had Matt Hughes fight, and I tried to get that fight. I had no idea who Matt Hughes was. I mean, all these names are not really names I know at that time. You know what I mean? It's the internet's not as easy to research. You know,
Hey, Chris.
He's just another guy I'd be fighting. But Goitia mercifully said I probably wasn't experienced enough to fight this guy, which I took as kind of an insult because I had like 5 fights and Hughes had, I think, 1.
I'm a veteran.
Anyhow, then he picked Snyder up, who had like 50 fights, carried him around the cage and slammed him and broke his ribs. So I was thanking Joe, kind of saving me on that one. Might have been the end of my career pretty young.
So Miguel, imagine this. Yeah, I only had like 5 fights. 3, 4, and 5 were Joey Gilbert, Jeff Curran, and Matt Hughes. Like,
Mike Hughes guy we were talking about the other day had 3 fights.
Tim Buchanan.
Who were they against?
So Tim Buchanan fought Walt Big Ticket Harris, where he made it to a decision with him. And like we talked to Walt Harris the other day, and he's just like, man, I can't believe the guy survived that. His next fight was Derek Lewis. And I can't remember the third guy, but it was
somebody really good.
It was somebody that made it to Bellator and was pretty like this guy, like
0-3, just like his sport sucks.
No, there was karma coming into play, and like maybe the cars or trains kept missing him, so they sent like 3 behemoths to try to kill him. Yeah, Tim Buchanan is his name. All right, so
the thing about it too is if you look at the fights that are against from that era for Keith that are against guys that aren't famous, if you know the era, like Josh Cate was not a bad little fighter. Brandon Bledsoe at the time, was kind of a real skinny little guy too, but he's still a martial artist training students and he made a whole life and career out of it. Josh Cate as well. So those guys, unsung guys that you were fighting, but they were all tough. Wes Collins, like I said, was a little bit more advanced than your average Joe for the time. So talk a little bit about, you were looking for the Matt Hughes fight. It's like, talk a little bit about that philosophy, where it comes from, because we'll talk about our exchange. And I got you a fight with Adrien Serrano. A guy who was
we're jumping ahead there, Miguel. So let me just kind of go in order. So,
all right, you go, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. and I get that. Like we're all kind of in this together, but we got to tell the story. So in essence, we just talked about Josh Cate, Brandon Bledsoe, which was the 4-man tournament that you were in. On your 5th recorded fight online, obviously not matching up with your actual record, was Jim Rhodes. And at this point, it's like you've got 3 submission victories. What was allowing you to put it together at that point?
So you're talking the 3 in a row were Bledsoe and Cate, and then the Rhodes fight.
And then you got Rhodes. So technically, you're looking at, on your online record, you're looking at fights 3, 4, and 5. That's correct.
So, and I don't mean to diminish those guys, because I actually am pretty good friends with. We don't stay in touch, but for years I did see them around, and I actually competed in an Abu Dhabi tournament against Cate later. But I would say Cate, Bledsoe, and Rhodes were probably pretty healthy, especially Rhodes. I mean, those were pretty healthy step downs from, Curran,
Gilbert.
Yeah, I mean, especially at that time, Bledsoe was a pretty good jiu-jitsu guy, but he had never fought prior to me. So I don't think he was used to getting hit in the face. And I think
he's not your weight class either, man. That's back in the lawless days, but you're a 170 pounder and he'd be a 145 pounder soaking wet.
Well, remember, I was 16 then.
Yeah, that's true.
I was probably about 150, 155, and not cutting to make that. That's just what I walked around with.
All right. So Keith, were you a big ticket seller at this point? Like, would all your buddies from high school come and watch a fight?
Not really. I mean, I became a pretty big ticket seller once I joined the union. my name carried more weight. I got to the point where I would sell, let a local show over 100 tickets, but which is a lot. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good for the promotion.
But you would turn all your tickets in at weigh-ins, and you would cut your ticket sales off a few days before, and like a good third of your tickets are the day before, and day of.
Yeah, I wasn't a hustler for tickets, but I had a contingent of fans. I mean, people came to watch me fight as I had success in the sport, and I owned the gym. So then the people that I trained over the years and their family would come watch. But yeah, I was pretty quiet in high school. My family would come to the fights, a few friends. I tended to fight. There weren't really any fights in Northwest Indiana when I started in the sport. So like the closest fight, you're driving like an hour into the heart of the city through traffic. I mean, most of the guys didn't want to do that. And, some of the fights were in Evansville, Iowa, up in Wisconsin. I mean, guys aren't, when you're 16, 17-year-olds, most guys aren't going to be driving 4 or 5 hours to go watch a fight.
Okay, so your 6th fight that's online is Shonie Carter.
No.
Tough one. Yeah. He had a lot of experience at that point.
Yes. So was this at this point, did you ever scout him at the Tropicana? And for people that might not know, the Tropicana was like a bar downtown Chicago, and Shonie was the house fighter, and you won $1,000 if you beat him, or $500 if you beat him. And they would literally pull drunks out of the crowd, and Shonie would just put on highlight reel knockout after highlight reel knockout for the audience.
My man.
I don't like anything that endangers drunks.
Shonie probably got free drinks. That was his payment. Like, you get free drinks. I'm like, all right.
He probably had about 50, 60 fights just at the Tropicana.
Yeah. I was familiar with that. I knew that was a thing, but I think I was too young to go to the Tropicana, to tell you the truth, at that time. And, but I was pretty familiar with Shonie. Like, when I tell you I wasn't familiar with these other fighters, this was about a year after those fights. So now I'd been to a lot of events. The internet, the underground was more of a thing. So I was pretty familiar
too.
What's that?
You were 17.
Yeah, it's grown man practically then. Hair on my chest.
Almost old enough to buy a pack of cigarettes. That's good.
Buy a lottery ticket, go to the military.
Yeah. So that fight, did you request to fight Shonie Carter?
So, back then it was kind of weird. The promoter would get a list of guys who wanted to fight and then just kind of match them up. So that was Pat Robinson actually promoted that. That was a show he called the Indiana Martial Arts Challenge. And I think he did 3 events total under that banner. And that was his 3rd show. And Shonie was going to be the main event. And I kind of liked the idea of being a main event in my hometown. I'd been on a winning streak. I felt like I could beat anybody. I still feel like that, but didn't work out in this particular case. But yeah, I would say I asked for that fight. I was pretty comfortable taking the fight at the time.
Okay, so for those that don't know, Keith, you lost by spinning back fist, and I think the opening exchange.
It was about 40 seconds. Yeah, it was not ideal.
Okay, so this is close to your house. This fight took place.
Yeah.
Now you win $1,000 for beating Shonie. What do you get for giving him, 40 seconds of hell?
Well,
$8.
I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have got 1,000 for winning. I don't remember what the pay was, but I'm sure it was less than 500 to win, and probably like, I don't know, maybe 200-300 to lose.
Okay, so
40.
Bring us through after something like that happens. Like, it's your first knockout. Like, you got completely knocked out. Am I correct? For the first time in your career?
Yeah, the only time in my career I've been knocked out.
Okay.
He actually hit me, and this is kind of strange to say, but he hit me in the neck. So I don't know. It's a strange place to get knocked out, but yeah, he hit me right in the side of the neck, and I felt like a sack of potatoes. Apparently I congratulated him like 6 or 7 times, because I was going to congratulate him, tell him good fight, shake his hand, and my brother's like, hey, we're good, we got to leave. You've already shaken his hand and said that like 7 times.
Did he come in with all of his belts and stuff at this point? Leather getup? Was he doing a Shonie Carter gimmick at that point?
Mr. International.
I don't think that's a show. I think that's who he is.
He was definitely a showman. He does the back flip, and he does like a weird side flip. And I would say he was probably a better athlete then, even than when he was in the UFC. I mean, I would say that's his prime. I mean, Shonie's, I'm sure he's probably in his 50s. I mean, he's not a young man.
He might be over 50. Yeah.
And people don't give him a lot of credit for this, but Shonie's a pretty good wrestler, especially like upper body, like Greco.
Very good.
I think he was a junior college All-American, if I don't.
He's a very good upper body Greco guy.
Yeah.
He can toss. He knows judo.
I've rolled with him. He's, and I'm solid upper body. He gives me all I want.
Really? So you guys rolled afterward? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not years afterwards, but maybe like a year or two later. Bob Shermer used to do these. I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but pancration. Remember, it was going to be an Olympic event.
Yep.
So
dude, Bob is still trying.
Bob's got a lot of different.
He's still trying that Olympic stuff, dude.
Team
America. Yeah, Keith, you're representing Poland. You just we're red and white.
So I got a question. I was going to bring this up later, but maybe you segued me. Shonie is obviously Mr. International. He had the show, but Keith, you worked on your ring entrances and your ring walks and your ring music a little bit too. Why don't you share with some people some of your choices for walkout music?
Let's hear it.
I'm a fighter that came out to all different songs, so it's not like a Matt Hughes where it was the same song. But I do remember you and your brother, thinking about it, like putting thought into. This time we're gonna come out to. Go ahead, you take it away, man. But it was pretty important to me. I came out to a lot of old country songs, like Don Williams, Good Old Boys Like Me. I came out to Merle Haggard's Curran
he'd
River.
come out to those old school country songs where everyone else has got death metal and yelling, and Keith would have a guy like a real slow folk type song that's very meaningful that you would never be able to actually understand the words at an event because people are going bonkers. Yes.
I fought Kyle Jenson up in Minnesota on one of Monty Cox's shows, and I came out to Kenny Rogers' Lucille. You guys familiar with that one?
I'm not.
No.
All right,
time to leave me, Lucille, for hungry children. No, I'm sure you'd recognize if Kenny sang it for you. But it takes
keep going, Keith. Give us some more.
It takes like 2 minutes to get to the chorus, and the guy that's running the back room is like, "You got to walk now. You got to go now," and it's
not yet.
It's a pretty small show, and I'm not getting paid a ton of money. It's just something I'm doing to stay busy, and I wasn't going to get cowed into going out there early. So, no,
still getting my mind right. Thinking about Lucille.
After like 2 minutes and threatened to withhold my purse and everything else, I walk out right to the chorus, and then I was not too worried about being shy. I sung at the top of my lungs on the way out.
That's awesome.
I think I beat Kyle in like 2 minutes. I credit the song.
That's good. Yeah. You know what, Keith? You freeze the kicker sometimes.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what you got to do.
He was a wily veteran and experienced guy. He was 18 years old at the time. He'd probably been fighting he probably his 12th fight.
It's crazy. All right. So your next fight is against Jason Glabus, who I remember locally as a tough guy. And what shocked me the most was that it's listed as a draw. I don't remember going to this fight or seeing the fight, but it's listed as a draw.
So I fought Jason Glabus twice, Chicago Challenge 5 and Chicago Challenge 6. They were at a St. Andrews gym in Chicago. And it was kind of a big show in Chicago, really. Actually, Matt Hughes had a really good main event might have been Chicago Challenge 5, one of those. But yeah, the first fight, it was pretty one-sided. I got the better of Glabus, but there were no judges. And that was pretty common back then. It was maybe
just
like half the fights had judges, and half the fights, if you went the distance, it was a draw.
Why?
There was no athletic division.
Yeah, we can't scrape together 3 good judges now.
Well, here, Miguel, this was like the most frustrating thing. So at the point in regional mixed martial arts at the time, there was a couple shows that would have a whole bunch of 2-rounders and then like 1 or 2 3-rounders, but everybody didn't want to draw. Like they wanted like a finish, and they were willing to fight 3 rounds, but their promoter just wanted 2 rounds for, I don't know. I mean, I asked the guy 50 times and he would just go, no, 2 rounds is cool.
It's
like,
easy.
I don't know.
The bottom line is you save the win money.
Yeah.
I actually was in favor of that. Tudo did something like that too, to be honest. Tudo did the B class and the A class, and the A class was 3, B class was 2, and it led to a lot of draws. But a lot of times what was the case is that those 2-round fights were almost the equivalent like an amateur fight. And when you go 3 rounds for those guys, they just would take a beating. Guys would have their hands on their knees, be a lot more knockouts in the last round. So I think in some ways protecting the fighter, let them get more experience before they do those long wars is maybe good for the fighters.
Yeah, but it was also one of the premier events for the area. So that was kind of like where I'm like, another 2 rounds.
Yeah, but you had the entry guys were always not as good.
Yeah,
and the more
fair
advanced.
enough. No, Keith, I'm sure you're correct.
Keith, about this, like he's gone over all your fights and everyone, we're talking about pretty tough guys. I mean, these aren't easy fights. It was just everybody you fought was up here, it seems like. Is that just how it was? I mean, I know how it was back then. Are you saying that's kind of how, explain to people that's how it was back then? Or was those just fights you chose to take the toughest ones?
Maybe a little bit of both. There were soft fights to be had, but I didn't do those. Like there were local bar circuits where guys built up. I don't know guys that built up phenomenal records, but they were against really soft competition. And I never really enjoyed the idea of just showing up and guys taking breathalyzers on their way to the ring and then fighting. It's just, I wasn't in the market for that. So yeah. And early in my career, I fought relatively tough guys to where I was. And then when I really started breaking through and taking the sport more seriously, I kind of became a road warrior. So I would travel to other areas and fight, maybe not the top guy from that area, although sometimes I did, but contenders from that area. Usually if someone's going to pay you to come in and travel, you're fighting a pretty tough local guy.
Exactly.
Well, that leads us to our next fight in regards to experience, travel. I don't know about local. And that is the 8th fight that you have online. And that's Miguel. You put him against Adrien Serrano, who probably had about 70 fights at that point. And I think already made a UFC debut.
All right. Well, let's talk about this here. So
let me justify this.
Yeah, go ahead, Miguel.
Keith,
get your lawyer on the line.
I definitely had noticed Keith if he hadn't already fought for us in Evansville. I think there was definitely an Evansville fight before that, but I'm not looking at it right now. So, you think travel, okay, it doesn't start more exotic than this, I think, it got better, right, Keith? Because this was travel, Wichita Falls, so it's not exactly, I saw camels on the drive there, you know what I mean? And what he did is he had to go from Portage or wherever in northern Indiana to Evansville, and in Evansville hook up with the production crew for Hook and Shoot, which was going to do the show in Wichita Falls, Texas. So him, his brother, the referee, Osborne, Aaron, who fought on that show, Matamoras, who fought on that show, all those guys in a van, I don't know how many hours. Let me ask you, did things fall apart? I don't remember, but did things fall apart on opponents and stuff? Or did you drive down there thinking you were fighting Adrien?
So I definitely didn't drive down there thinking I was fighting Adrien. I'm trying to remember. I feel like I might have been fighting a guy from the Lion's Den, like a relatively inexperienced, I'm trying to think, is it Tulsa Lion's Den?
Okay. Oh, and you got Guy Mesmer there too. Yep. So it could have been either one. But
I think I was fighting a relative beginner from that gym, and that may have fallen through, or I may have just been going Justin fought a tournament. It's supposed to be a 4-man tournament, ended up being a 3-man tournament. He just fought one fresh guy and then another fresh guy. But I may.
So both you guys got screwed. It just wasn't one Wisniewski. Okay.
The other Wisniewski's tougher. Justin's a little tougher. He beat both of his guys. But no, I think Adrien's opponent fell through, and I liked that matchup. I had seen Adrien fight. I was really familiar with him. I felt, for people who aren't familiar with Adrien, he's a pretty dominating top fighter, and he's got
150 fights.
He's got impeccable conditioning. He just kind of wears people out. But I figured I'd be a hard takedown, and I could probably outstrike him. He's pretty short. So, just like the Shonie fight, I talked myself into the fact that I was going to win. And it was more competitive than the Shonie fight. But his experience and ability level showed.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta go into the deep waters with those guys to kind of really understand what experience really means.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, Adrien was a pro, really. You know, he'd done pro wrestling as well, and he'd been all over the world and stuff. And you're talking about a guy who fought Vanderlei Silva in Brazil in, you know, a bare knuckle MMA fight. So, you know, you can't pay for that experience. You know what I mean? But yeah, I remember worrying about it because I remember talking to Adrien about the fight because Keith was young. You know, he was a kid. And Adrien kind of was like, no, but I know I've seen he's tough. He's a tough kid, you know. So Adrien was like, he didn't act like he gave you respect, is what I'm saying. You know, he didn't act like I'll play with him for a little while for you. You know what I mean? It wasn't that at all. He knew he was gonna have to take you serious. So but I remember having to have that conversation with him because there was that doubt in my mind. But I do. The other thing I remember about the show is that there was like a group of like guys from Mexico that crossed the border and covered a lot of the fights that fell apart. We did have a lot of fights falling apart there. And, you know, my hat's off to those guys from Mexico and their little matchmaker there because they helped us out. And also Travis Luter debuted on that show.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Big.
Wow. Who did Travis fall? He did the grappling tournament, didn't he? Or
Yeah,
did
he did the Abu Dhabi tournament, and that's where he qualified for that. And yeah, and from there he went on to fight and hook and shoot. And
all right, so when I look at people's careers like yourself, Keith, that have got fights everywhere, you know, there's like kind of certain levels that you have to achieve to be experienced, you know, to be called like a veteran fighter. You know, it's like you've got to fight a guy that's fought in the UFC, maybe even a title contender. You've got to take an airplane somewhere in order to, you know, get a fight. And if I had to like pinpoint your first fight on an airplane, I would assume it's your 15th recorded fight against Matt Lee in Lowell, Massachusetts. Am I correct on that?
That would be correct. Yes.
Okay. How does a fight like that come together?
So actually, Miguel, I'll give him the credit for that one. So I've been fighting on the hook. Actually, honestly, Hook and Shoot was to me like one of the premier shows. So I try to almost kind of avoid the Chicago circuit, even though I fought some of those fights. I kind of like going down to Evansville and competing. I thought the competition level was higher. The weigh-ins were better run. It was just a better run show at the time. And
you are a stickler for weight at weigh-ins. Like that is your pet peeve.
Oh yeah.
I like shows that start on time, weigh-ins that start on time. I mean,
yeah, but you're a little obsessive about it, and you should be. That's your job, you know. But even for your guys,
it sounds petty, but you know,
It's not.
The UFC always starts on time, so people probably don't realize this. But a lot of local shows wait till the crowd starts showing up to start, so you end up warming up for an extra hour than you want to warm up. You know, they start an hour and a half late. Weigh-ins are late. The scale's a bathroom scale. It's just a lot of stuff that's frustrating. So when you can find someone that's doing it right, you kind of want to stick with them.
Well, and I also noticed about you, not only the weigh-in start on time, but making sure everything's like to the T. The person makes weight. A lot of these times you go in, especially back then. Yeah, he made weight. Trust me. You're like, oh no, it's not going to go down like this. Or well, he was a pound. He's, you know, he's almost there. And I know a lot of people don't think that's a big deal, a pound or two. I think it is. You know, I mean, if you suck down and go through that extra work and it taxes on you, and you did, they kind of need to do it too. So a lot of people, especially you can tell the hometown guy, they will try and do whatever they can to let him get by with murder.
Okay, so Keith, did you think you finally made it at that point because you got your first flight to an event to fight somebody?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that's making it. You know what I mean? But it was definitely.
You're on your road.
So that was the first fight I started cutting. It was a catch weight, but it was when I cut from 185, like 205 back to 170. So I went from like 55 when I was 16 to when I'm like 20. I like 195, 198. I was competing.
How'd you get that high?
I'm a little husky.
Okay.
A little husky now too. But you know, people didn't know about weight cutting. I mean, weight cutting, there were definitely elite fighters that did some serious weight cutting, but I don't think it was nearly as common in the sport then as it is now. So I kind of learned a little bit more about cutting weight, and I just focused more on fitness. And instead of doing it all at once, I kind of went like 180, 175, 170. And so Matt Lee was at 175, and that was a really, really good card. So when you talk about making it, I mean, that was by far the best card I'd fought on up to that point. I mean, I would say you probably had 10, 15 UFC guys on that card. Dana White was ringside. I think Tito Ortiz was ringside. Mickey Ward was ringside. I mean, it was, and there were probably,
it was in Lowell. He's a pride of. He's
Well,
a pride of
Lowell,
Lowell.
Mass, baby.
Let me tell you, a shout out to Tom Hafers, who was the promoter on that. He brought me in as the matchmaker, and Tom put on 3 very classy shows in Massachusetts. These were at the Songus Arena, which is basically a 10,000 seat minor league hockey arena. You know, they take but it was a big arena.
Wow.
We didn't. But let me, stars cross, and sometimes, guys don't do well, and you wonder why, but you get bad luck sometimes. So the first show that we did under the U.S. MMA flag in Massachusetts was on May 18th, 2002. And as Chris astutely pointed out, it was in Lowell, Massachusetts. That's the same day as Ward Gotti.
Bro.
We ran our first show there on the same day as one of the Ward Gotti fights. So
That's a little rough.
By
Not a good
put
idea.
him, pull the pin and reschedule that one.
Yeah,
There was
it
8 people there.
Yeah, the guys, these guys didn't make the bus that was going to Atlantic City, so they stuck around bitterly, at our show. But yeah, so it was that type of thing. A Keith show was a little bit better run, and it was a better show that came in September, and yeah, it was a good show. And Matt Lee is a very, very tough guy too. And you talk about another guy who was conditioning first. He fought a lot of guys.
Keith, I thought like if it was either that fight or it was Markham Macera who he fought in New Orleans.
So I know that the Macera fight was after. I don't know how long it was after.
It was the next fight.
That was a flight as well, but that was a strange situation. So I was on I don't remember if I was just on a little bit of layoff and having trouble finding, because I managed myself, having trouble finding a fight, but someone posted on the Underground that they had a main event opening in New Orleans, and I read about this. I feel like it may have been like Wednesday night, Thursday morning, but I flew out like the next day. Like I read about it, like the next morning I'm on it. I called him in the middle of the night, got on an airplane. You guys still see me? I lost you. There you are.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, we're here.
So the next day I get on an airplane, I weigh in that night, I get off the airplane, weigh in, and then I think I flew on Thursday and fought on a Friday, if I remember right. And I spent the whole weekend there, but yeah, it was like probably less than 48 hours notice.
Okay. So
when I heard about the fight to when I fought.
Did you have a job that you had to call in sick for, or did you just what was that situation?
I was pretty young then. I was probably, I'm guessing I was 20-ish, 19, 20-ish. I was a college student. I was in the National Guard. And I was probably delivering pizzas just as, so, I mean,
no call, no showed?
There wasn't anything I couldn't get out of. You know what I mean? It wasn't going to be a big deal.
It's just, who cares? I'm not even telling them I'm going. You got a knockout in that. Were they shocked? Like, how silent was the audience when you knocked out with Marco Macera, who is very tough, I might add?
He is. He's more of a grappler. They were not silent actually there. It was not a huge arena. It's a nightclub. They used to do these. It was a little bit like Finky's up here, where they do these monthly fights at a nightclub, but they would do like 1 or 2 pretty good pro fights to cap the night off. But it was one of those where you clip the guy, but he can't quite fall. So he stumbles into the corner, and I threw, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 straight punches, and the ref actually jumped in and waved it off standing. So crowd was pretty fired up, and I came out to the Grateful Dead, so they were probably even more fired up about that.
What song? Do you remember?
Uncle John's Band.
Oh, man. So, what's funny is the promoter of the event was Melvin Gillard's original, like, instructor and, like, promoter and coach. And you talk to Melvin about the guy, and he gives you about 30 minutes. You know, you don't know if it's up or down or left, right, center. It's pretty funny.
He's a pretty strange guy from what I remember. I mean, it was just that one weekend, but
what do you recall about that? Because Melvin pretty much insinuated that as well.
He was kind of a blowhard. He didn't mind talking himself up a little bit. I don't want to run him down because he was nice enough to me, but he was strange.
I always find that
it was a long, strange trip or something, you know?
Yeah.
Came after that. I don't know.
All right, so Keith, after that, your 20th fight is against Jorge Santiago from the American Top Team.
So that was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Was it Miguel again that got you that fight?
Yes. Yeah, he was the matchmaker.
I'm not sure he was your friend, Miguel. I'm speaking.
I know. I mean, even though you're winning a lot of these, I think he's trying to get you beat. That's my thought. I don't know.
I mean, I appreciate his effort, but I just didn't think he had it in him.
Walk us through that fight, man.
Yeah, walk us through it.
So I was real familiar with him because I had flown down to Florida for AFC 5, and I believe he fought fighter I'm pretty familiar with, Derek Noble, on that card. So I'd watched him fight Noble. I think John Colossi, one of my teammates at the time, fought. So he's pretty good grappler, pretty good striker, real long, athletic. But I felt like I matched up pretty well with him. Fight did not go my way for the first 2 rounds. He got me in 2 really tight triangles, mounted me at one point. So I was definitely down 2 rounds to nothing, but he gassed, and they played my fight song, which got me fired up before the 3rd round. They played Manfred Mann's Mighty Quinn version. Got me fired up, and I was able to kind of wear him out and put him away in the 3rd.
What's that Rocky moment?
Yeah, it was. They've done this a couple times. Like I fought Steve Berger years later, and I'd come out to who did I come out to? Jackson Brown's These Days. You familiar with that song?
Yeah.
So they played it. Same thing. It really got me fired up, and 3rd round was all mine.
So Jorge Santiago, obviously Miguel lined that up. AFC was kind of like a feeder show. I shouldn't say a feeder show. It was more of a showcasing of the American Top Team fighters. So they would bring in guys and yeah, I mean, it was pretty much kind of like the red or blue corner, wherever the American Top Team was in, blue corner. That whole side of the locker room generally got their hand raised that night. Jorge Santiago was kind of, obviously he's not with them anymore, but at the time he was kind of the cornerstone of their gym of the up-and-comers. I think you probably surprised a lot of people with that victory.
I would say I was probably the underdog.
For sure you were.
I'm not. I mean, you say that, and maybe Miguel and the American Top Team says.
Not in your head, though, right?
Well, yeah, I felt good about that matchup. I actually think I got a couple tough breaks early that, you know, I feel like I probably could have won those first 2 rounds. They just, you know, had a couple near takedowns, got tangled up in the ropes, and he got a nice slam on me. He's tough. He's a good fighter. I'm definitely not taking anything away from him, but I didn't feel like an underdog in that fight.
Yeah, he's a monster. I think he's Kamaru Usman's trainer now. Yeah, he's a beast. He's a beast.
And he bulked up to 85 and had a, you know, pretty. I think he had a lot of success at 85. I mean, he had a good run.
Yeah, no, for sure. So then you get 7 wins in a row, you including that, and you get offered to fight a Militich Fighting Systems guy by the name of Jason Black, who was a savage beast wrestler, real boring in terms of just like fighting style, but his wrestling was so dominant he tended to nullify a lot of people, and you decided to kind of test your wrestling acumen against his pressure.
Yeah, I can't remember how the Black fight exactly came about. You know, it was just kind of we're both Midwest guys, same way, kind of I think Black should have already been in the UFC when I fought him, but because some people found his fighting style, you know, not as exciting, I think he didn't get as many opportunities. But because he hadn't already gotten that call up, it was kind of a fight that was destined to happen.
Well, keep in mind too that they had Militich still active, Hughes and Laverne Clark. That's 3 guys in that way.
And Robbie Lawler.
And Lawler even then, he had a cup of coffee back then. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that was at 170 also. So yeah, unfortunately, Jason Black fell through the cracks. Yeah.
So
I feel like at the time he was probably better than Lawler, although not as exciting. And
I agree with that.
And as good as Laverne Clark is, I mean, Laverne Clark's a dangerous fighter at that time, but I feel like Jason Black was a lot better than Laverne Clark as well.
He would take him down and held him down. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like he's a guy that didn't get the credit he was due. I got a lot of respect for that guy.
Well, how can you not? How can you not? So Chris and Miguel, we talk about like crazy runs in MMA. Like, sometimes we throw together, when we do our long form podcast, we kind of talk about just different aspects of MMA that most people don't talk about. In 2004, let me read this so I make sure I get it properly. The record of opponents that Keith fought in 2004 during this, 7-fight win streak was 81 wins, 21 losses, and 3 draws. And the majority of those losses was by one fighter, and that's Kyle Jenson, who, as you had mentioned earlier, Keith, he's one of those guys that he'd get right to a certain point and take a real bad fight and knock himself off the UFC radar. But several times in his career, he was on the UFC radar and was an absolute stud in a difficult fight.
Yeah, I feel like, he traveled mostly in that Minnesota circuit, so I didn't see him fight a ton, but he beat some relatively good people. I think he probably had somewhat of a padded victory record. He fought on some of those Ultimate Minnesota cards. And I would say some of the guys he fought weren't great fighters, but
for sure.
But he had a ton of wins. He didn't have that. When I fought him, he didn't have, I think he was like 28-7 or something when I fought him. Yeah. He had a decent record.
Real good.
Yeah. He mostly a wrestler though, that was his strength. And I felt like I was probably going to be the better wrestler. And that's kind of how it played out.
So a few of the other names on that list were Steve Berger, Derek Noble, and Carlo Prater.
Tough guys, man. Now on a different note, Keith, I know you're talking about these guys being good wrestlers, but you feel like your wrestling's better. How did that happen when you weren't like a high school wrestler? You know what I mean?
So that's a big regret for mine. I went to Portage High School.
Great wrestling school.
Yeah, really, especially at that time, maybe the best public school in the state. Now, Evansville Mater Dei was a better private school, but definitely one of the top 3 or 4 wrestling programs in the state. But at the time I got into the sport, wrestling was almost kind of going out of fashion. That was kind of when the stall and brawl tactics were happening, and Maurice Smith had upset Coleman, and
I see.
Submissions were kind of a big thing, and I don't mean to discount wrestling, because to me, I think it's the best base a fighter could come in with. But at the time I could have wrestled, I thought wrestling wasn't that important. So I didn't take advantage of that opportunity. And I wish I had. But after high school, Justin and I both really focused on improving our wrestling. We both they did these regional workouts here where the wrestlers would get together at different wrestling rooms and workouts. We'd go there, and then I had a couple buddies, Davion Peterson, used to train. And then John Fitch, both trained, both at Purdue. So I'd go down there and wrestle some. So, wrestling became a focus. It just wasn't when I was younger. And then we got several state champions come through my gym. We had Darren Elkins, obviously, but we also had Jason Tabor. Later, we had Sean McMurray. We had probably 20 state placers and college wrestlers come through the gym. So,
man,
even though I never wrestled, our gym became like a hotbed of some of the best wrestlers in the region.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, real quick question for you here. I remember I saw Keith fight once up in Fort Wayne. He fought there was no time limit. It was a 31-minute fight. I think if you already passed that up, was that a long time in his past? CJ Fernandez, you already passed that fight up?
No, I think that one's coming up. Yeah.
We're way past that one.
Oh, are we really?
So. Okay. By this time, it's time limits in 2004.
Did you fought a 31-minute fight against CJ Fernandez?
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah. So a couple of fights.
Who's got a huge record too, I might add, for those at home.
Yeah.
Chris, Chris fought CJ for me.
Yeah.
And CJ broke Chris's shoulder.
See that bone right there? That's CJ's doing. How it still sticks out.
His clavicle or shoulder and stuff. He did that.
Separated shoulder first round.
First minute of the fight with a slam, and Chris beat him in the 6th or 7th minute. So
I guess it was like 10 minutes in that.
It felt like it for you, I bet.
It sucked.
I got cut. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The legendary Tell City.
Yeah, I hated it. Hey, the funny part, real quick for me afterwards, I didn't know what was going on. I was like, Tell City. I was like, yeah, I got to go. They're like, let's go to the hospital. I was like, I don't want to go here. Let's go back to Indy. About a 3-hour drive. So Tony Ross bought me a 6-pack of beer and gave me 2 pills. I don't know what they were. So I take it. I'm driving home. About halfway there, I'm like, I think it's all right. It doesn't hurt anymore. They're like, we're going to the hospital, Chris. All right. They were right. It's messed up.
To give them credit, I helped them out with the hospital bill. With the early days on that.
That's how I knew. Like Miguel was it. That was the bill was more than my purse was for sure, and he took care of it. I couldn't believe it. Thanks.
Chris is all class though, because he didn't even charge me for the 6-pack. That's cool, man. But
get back to your 31-minute fight. My God, tell us a little bit about that. That's nuts.
So early, I fought a couple fights where I think 2 fights where there are no time limits, and I fought a couple fights with pretty close to like Vale Tudo rules with headbutts and the whole bit. Soccer kicks, knees to the head on the ground. But that wasn't all that uncommon then. I think some of the early hook and shoots had basically Vale Tudo rules. I think they even did a couple in like somebody's bedroom. They did the fights. If you get some old tapes. Yeah,
with the wood paneling.
Yes, I remember that distinctly. So it was at a ice hockey arena. It was a pretty nice show there. And I actually got the better of that fight early. I expected maybe to wear him out. He kind of had a reputation of gassing. And I controlled probably the first 20 minutes of that fight, even though he cut me early. So it ended up being like a slip and slide we were fighting in. But I actually gassed later, and he started winning late in the fight. And I don't know. I think he finished me at, like you said, right around 31, 32 minutes. And that was the only one of the few fights I've ever really had to go to the hospital. I mean, I was in pretty bad shape, like dehydration, concussion. I had to get stitched. I mean, I was senior in high school then, so I was pretty young.
Jesus.
But would your teachers talk to you about this, or what was the feel at your high school?
Is there
like,
problems at home? Should we call somebody?
Do we got DCFS? What's going on here?
I didn't think it wasn't really that big of a deal. I kind of felt like I was doing something a little different than everyone else. So I would kind of bring the VHS tapes in and try to show people, this is what it is. It's kind of cool. But it wasn't like, it really wasn't that huge of a deal. I mean, I don't.
To you, but I think, you look at some of the administrators and, the teaching field, like today, they're horrified by it. I can't even imagine, like, that's the Wisniewskis, hey, we'll talk later.
Don't say anything to them.
I feel like when I was in my early 20s, and all the way through to when I retired, I had somewhat of a lot of people knew who I was from owning the gym and training other local fighters. But really, when I first started in the sport, none of these fights were local, and they're not on TV. So
yeah.
Other than maybe a VHS tape I might bring into the class to show somebody, nobody even really knows about it. It's just something they sort of know you're doing it, but it's not a big deal.
What are you doing this weekend? I got to go smoke pot in my mom's attic. Hopefully, she goes out to bingo that night. What about you? I'm going to drive 5 hours to go fight in a league, and some sort of UFC veteran and with some dubious promoter with no insurance.
But I'm going to get paid $200. So
yeah.
You know what though, Chris? Keith was right. It is different than what other people were doing. Huh?
Absolutely. I do remember that when you were the late great Tony Ross was fought that night, and he was at the hospital. He's like, I ran into Wisniewski there. Kind of rated. I think he was getting stitched up. You were getting stitched up. So.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. All right, so Keith, let's talk about 2005. you go to Japan. I think it's your first time to Japan. Am I correct?
My only time.
Your only time. So you never cornered there either. Am I?
So Justin fought there, and then I think maybe Colossi might have fought there, but Justin didn't get a corner. And I think when Colossi fought there, if I remember right, Justin was one of the Duneland guys fought there, but I think Justin went and cornered. So that's the only time I've been in Japan.
So Shinya Aoki was your opponent, and it was a real weird submission that you had lost by.
So it was actually, I don't even know if you'd call it a submission. I think it's, and I've never done judo, like official judo, but Aoki's a really decorated judoka guy in Japan. And I think he was going for a throw. So it kind of like hyperextends and locks out your arm, and that pressure is kind of supposed to drive you to the mat. But I didn't really go with it. I resisted it. And like the moment he exploded into it, my elbow dislocated. So a lot of sake that night. You know, I still went to the bar and put a few back. But
did you go to Roppongi? Was it Roppongi? What's it called?
Roppongi.
That is
that's
where I went. Yeah. I was with. I didn't get a cornerman there. Just they weren't willing to pay. So it was John Fitch was cornering Brian Ebersol. So Fitch cornered me, and I think Ebersol might have even cornered me.
It was always neat, man. When you'd go over to Japan like that, and that happens sometimes. Like you didn't have a corner, so like you and the other Americans all stuck together and cornered each other. You know, it was like kind of us against the world. I remember doing that several times.
Yeah, Russia too. I went to Russia without a corner, and it was the same way. Strasser and I think Miguel actually cornered me. So yeah, it is kind of nice. You know, you do band together pretty tight. You make some good friends from those trips.
Absolutely.
What was your experience there?
Too, like in the 90s, didn't you, Chris?
What's that?
You fought in Japan in the 90s, didn't you?
90s and early 2000s. Yeah, I went to Japan a lot. I really enjoyed going over there, and you know, every time we'd fight, and then you know you'd go to Roppongi for the night and stay out all night. You'd take the subway back at 6 a.m, and take a shower and go to your flight. That was a routine every time. Like I'm gonna sleep all the way home now. It's gonna be great.
Keith, did you like Roppongi? Like, what was your? I mean, you're from Northwest Indiana. That's and granted, you're pretty well traveled for somebody from your area, but that's there's a pretty big difference between where you live and what you experience there.
Yeah, you know, even like a big city like Chicago, it doesn't really compare in the size and scope of Tokyo. Like, we probably drove for like 40 minutes and we're still in high rises. I mean, it was pretty incredible how many people, how populated that city is. And just, it's almost, New York's kind of comparable with the hustle and bustle, I guess. And no other city that I've been to other than New York probably really compares in the hustle and bustle. Obviously for a foreigner, I mean, if you're going to go to Tokyo and you're looking to have a good time, Roppongi is probably the place you want to go, because honestly, it's strange, but girls will buy you drinks. They'll ask you to dance. I mean, it's a different world for a
karaoke.
For a gaijin.
That's where they want you to go. That's where they want you to go. You got to be sneaky and find out where they go. That's what you got to do. Let me ask you, but talk about Aoki, because this is a special fight. You know what I mean? Like Aoki,
he's a legend.
And he came up with a reputation through the Shudo system as being the next guy kind of thing, like the post Kara stuff and the post Ruminasai, you know, like the next guy of that weight class. And he's turned into a pretty good guy. Talk about like how that was presented to you, how that came about.
Yeah, how'd you land it?
So, you know what, you got paid.
The Aoki fight was kind of a bookend for me. So, you know, we're talking about kind of streaks, and that I actually fought 6 times in 6 months at that point.
Yeah.
So I fought August against Jason Black. I fought September against Kyle Jenson, October against Steve Berger, November against Derek Noble, December against Carlo Prater, and then the last fight of that run was against Aoki. And
it is
pretty talented group of fighters. I mean, at the time, some like Aoki ended up being, I would say Aoki was legitimately probably top 5 in the world at a time at 155. I mean, I think he was the Pride champ, wasn't he, for a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, I mean, I would say he probably had, of that group of people, the best career. But, I mean, I think you could make the argument that Black may have been the most decorated fighter as well. I mean, it was just a pretty solid 6 fights in a row.
Phenomenal run.
And Aoki wasn't like this huge step up opponent. It was just another guy, another payday, a chance to go to Japan. He was one of the lesser experienced guys, even though he was really, really respected for his judo.
How did you land the fight?
So Who Can Shoot, who I'd fought for quite a bit, had cut a deal with Shudo. So I'd gotten some Shudo connections through them. And then I also fought for the Ironheart Crown locally, and they had connections with Shudo. So I fought a guy who took a last minute replacement on Ironheart Crown and beat him. And then the next Ironheart Crown, I was the main event against Noble. So that November fight was a class judo main event fight. And when I won that, they approached me about coming to Japan to fight.
Okay. So let me ask you about like local politics now in terms of the fight world. Why did you and Jason Chambers never fight? Jason was from like the Lethal Weapon. He was on a TV show. I think he's got a Henzo Gracie school in Florida right now. I mean, respected teacher, black belt. But you two, I was always surprised that you two never met up.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of a fluke thing. We fought on several of the same cards really early. Like when I'm 6, he's maybe a year or two older than me, not much, because I think he was fighting when he was like 17 and I was 16 on the same cards. We were around the same weight. We never ended up fighting, and then I think he moved to California. I kind of went on to bigger fights than when he was fighting. And then he moved to California, and we just never ended up fighting. I like Jason quite a bit. He was a likable guy, as a confident, maybe the point of being cocky in some people's minds, but I always really liked him. Got along.
Oh, he dressed to the nines with the sunglasses on inside. Yeah, no, he was a character, man. I enjoyed watching him fight too. I really did, man. I liked him a lot. From there, you go on to BoDog. Miguel, it seems that Miguel has been kind of carrying you wherever he goes. He tends to bring at least one of the Wisniewskis with him.
Justin and I both had a really, really good working relationship with Miguel. In my opinion, that's my favorite matchmaker of all time, both as a fighter and then later as a manager. Duneland guys, and I honestly feel like we show up, we make weight as a team, we fight hard, we have an exciting style. So I think it's probably part of the reason he recruited us is because we fulfilled our end. But when I talk about like a stickler for filling the contract, Miguel was that to a T. And when things couldn't go the way, guys pulled out or an event got canceled or something went wrong, he would do everything he could to make it right. And beyond that, and I think any fighter that fought in those circuits will tell you, there really wasn't a show that was much more fun. Like the group of people that surrounded the show, and there was a pretty large group, and they all traveled with it, like a
Bob Voss,
Rory Wah, Bob Long, Wes Callens. Wes Callens I was seeing Wes Callens 15 years later. I mean, he hadn't fought. I don't even think he trained. He was always at those shows, and he's a real good guy. I used to go to a lot of those too. Miguel used to take. That's how my relationship with Miguel started.
I mean, I wasn't at that show, but Miguel would take me to a bunch of those as well.
To me, it was the most fun as a fighter to go to those shows. The post-fight atmosphere was a good time. The event was going to be run right, and you were just going to have a lot of fun with it.
Keith was one of those guys where as things got bigger, you can't reward everybody, bring everybody along kind of thing. But Keith was one of those guys that I think he summed it up early, right? We were talking about how he's a stickler for the weigh-ins and stuff like that. But really, that's just about it. Everything else was just pretty low maintenance and stuff, You have
Keith, how many times have you pulled out of a fight because of an injury?
So I'm trying to remember if I ever did.
But that's it. That's part of being low maintenance, Like you've had fights canceled, but not often.
I fought through some pretty decent injuries, I like that 6-fight streak. I broke my hand during that early in that streak. I think I broke it in the Jenson fight, maybe in the Burger fight. I broke my nose in the Burger fight. And I re-broke it really bad in the Prater fight. You know, I mean, I remember I fought that Aoki fight and I dislocated my elbow. And after I dislocated my elbow, it was like weird. If you bumped my elbow at all, I would just completely lose feeling. It would hang at my side. So my next fight was actually for Miguel. It was I fought Musail Allaudinov in
BoDog.
Well, no, it wasn't BoDog, but it was MFC. It was called in Atlantic City. Yeah, kind of predated BoDog. It was, you know, similar fighters, similar organization, but different.
I think it was all the same players, but a different name. But it's listed as BoDog online.
Is it really?
Yeah, at least what I found.
BoDog didn't exist at that point. You know, BoDog was probably 2 years after that or so.
Yeah, that promoter Vlad was the guy who signed a partnership with BoDog later. So it was the same like official promoter, but it was pre-BoDog like in terms of funding.
But I was having like leading up to that fight, my arm probably just went completely dead where I couldn't. I mean, I could handle the pain, but I couldn't use it. It would hurt, but I couldn't use the arm. It'd be completely immobile for like 2 minutes, and this happened quite a bit in practice leading up to it.
So why wouldn't you give yourself some time off?
You know, you got to make the mortgage or the rent at that time, probably. But well, I mean, I'd already committed to the fight. I wanted to do it, and the injury started to fade. You know, it wasn't happening anymore. So I go out there. I'm warming up in the ring. I was with Irish Tom McCoy. He was one of my teammates. Justin didn't make the trip. I assume somebody else must have been fighting that day. And we're just kind of going through the motions in the cage, warming up, doing some clinch work. And I threw a knee that was supposed to hit him in the body, but it clipped my elbow. And it just went dead for like 3 minutes. And this is probably, maybe 3 hours before the fight. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was kind of a different time. I promoted fights later, and I saw how hard it was to replace people last minute, how much worse the fights ended up being. You get these guys that weren't good opponents. They hadn't sold any tickets, so it'd kill you in that sense. Yeah. Just the matchups ended up being terrible, and I didn't want to do that. You know, I always wanted to fill my end of the obligation.
You know what, Keith, too? I think back then, just, you know, at least myself, I don't know if improper training, but you just trained hard all the time. And I don't ever remember not being hurt for a fight. You know, I mean, there's different levels of being really hurt or not hurt, but you always had something the thought of pulling out really wasn't in there. You know what I mean? I mean, you were always kind of hurt. You know what I mean? I think it was a different mentality, a different era. And like, you didn't take 4 months between fights and make sure everything's perfect. You would just fight a lot very often, it seemed like, and you just fought hurt. I just think that was more of the thing. Would you disagree with that?
I do. I think, you know, fighting was almost part of training, you know, especially early on. You know, you wouldn't even really get up for a fight separate from training. You'd train right. You know, you might train on Friday and then go fight Saturday until you get to a certain point in your career. Yeah. And then you sort of have that habit, you know, you're so used to fighting through injuries. And like you said, you're never really 100. And I think that's probably any sport, you know, any contact sport. I mean, I'm sure football players, you can see them out there with casts, you know, playing in the NFL days. So I don't think it's unique, but I was never highfalutin about which take.
So there's two things that I'm taking away from this. One, Miguel, we make a big deal about 50 Fight Club members. Like, we really do. Like, it's something special that we like honor and cherish. And you don't see other podcasts doing that because they're not even thinking that way. But at the end of the day, you just watch 250 Fight Club members just go, well, yeah, dude, you just got to fight. It's like, it's your job. You got to go to work, right? You go to work and you only pay your bills, but it's more of like an honor thing. Like, you commit to a fight, you got to do it no matter how banged up you are because you're going to be hurt anyway. However, in this fight, you know, injuries aside, and I remember talking to you about that. You're like, yeah, my hand goes numb. And, you know, I'm like, well, Keith, you know, it's a telltale sign of a heart attack or a pinched nerve, probably a pinched nerve, dude. You know, maybe go chiropractor or whatever. And you're like, I'll just keep working out with it. But
work through it.
Yeah, I'm just going to work it out. But in that fight, the surprising thing to me was you knocked him out. And Derek Noble, who, in my opinion, probably had some of the heaviest hands in the region, wasn't able to accomplish that fact. And it was also Musail's last fight that he had ever fought. Like, whatever transpired that night, he didn't want any more of it. Like, his fight career was over. And he's a Russian Red Devil. Is that your second Russian Red Devil that you had fought at that time?
Yes, it was. It was I ended up fighting 3 guys from the Red Devil team, but that was my second.
We're getting
Musail,
there.
if I'm not mistaken, I think Musail passed away.
Oh, really?
I'm not like right after that, but maybe 10 years later, I think he got murdered, like a political murder. And he was from, I don't want to say Russia, but like a satellite state. And I can't remember. I couldn't tell you offhand, but I remember
Chechnya, Kazakhstani or
who
something.
knows? Dagestan. Yeah.
I think that is it. I think he was from maybe Dagestan, if I'm pronouncing.
So yeah, the Keith, you talked about the Shonie Carter fight and how that was the only time you've been knocked out, and that this might be something where, your toughness maybe works together. Maybe instead of getting concussed a couple of times, you go to sleep, it would have been a little easier on you, because there were a couple of times where you had that concussions in fights, and then, it doesn't sound like at Duneland you guys treated it like, with kid gloves there. So talk about like the after effects and like how you adjusted in the latter part of your career to the headshots. Talk about how many concussions you think you've had.
So, well, you talk about the Musail fight. I was probably down 2-0 in that fight, and I actually got dropped twice. And to me, typically, if you get dropped and you have no legs under you, where you can't even stand, you probably got a concussion.
Oh, you don't know that. I know you're right.
Who, me?
Yeah, who, me?
Those were relatively mild concussions. I mean, if I had to estimate, I would say I've probably had maybe 150 concussions, for sure over 100 in my life.
Wow. Christ.
And I'm almost positive they're concussions. I've had times in the gym, quite a few times. I mean, guys, if you interview some of the Duneland guys from that time who sparred with me, I've had a fair amount of sparring matches, and we sparred pretty hard at Duneland, where I'd actually stop the other guy. I'd land a body shot or something, and we'd have to stop sparring. But a minute or two before that, I got caught with something, and that's probably why I turned up the intensity and ended up stopping the other guy. But I'm trying to remember my mom's maiden name, my birthday, serious memory loss, and it would last for several hours. So
wow,
undoubtedly those are concussions. You know what I mean?
For sure.
You know what's nuts? Keith? I would have to say, and I've fought an awful lot. I think I probably had one concussion I can ever think of.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. Isn't that weird? I mean,
even as a kid, I got a few concussions, like football, soccer, even, middle school age. I was always, any type of headshots, I would have issues with memory loss and dizziness. So
wow.
And they weren't to the point where, like Miguel said, I wasn't prone to getting knocked unconscious, and I could usually kind of, find enough equilibrium to get my legs back under me and fight through it. But yeah, I don't think that was, obviously that's not good for your health. I'm not positive I have bad effects from it, but for sure it's not something I would recommend to people.
Okay, so from there you go on to fight Carlo Prater again.
So yeah, the second fight.
Is this for a payday or is this like pride? Because you'd already beat him once.
I guess both. The first fight was a good fight. It was the best of our 3 fights by far. It was a really good fight. I got a little hometown cooking in that fight. I scored a takedown and got triangle rear mount. I don't know, maybe a minute into the fight, and he scooted back. So just his feet were outside the ropes. Like everything else was inside the ropes, but his feet were outside the ropes, and the ref jumped in and stood us up. He was kind of
oh my God.
He was kind of the local boy. And then I'm winning this fight. It's a good fight. It's competitive. And with I don't know, 30 seconds to go, he gets a reversal on me in this third round. He gets a reversal on me and lands 7 or 8 really good elbows. And just my nose was already broken from the burger fight, but this was broken where the tip is touching over here. I mean, it's a pretty good break, and it's pouring like a faucet. Well, I reversed him, got on top, and there's probably like 8 seconds to go, maybe 7 seconds to go. I'm in his guard, and the ref jumps in and breaks it up, and then wants to take me to get checked by the doctors so they can stop the fight. And
what a scumbag.
They're trying to wave it off. Like the doctor's trying to stop the fight with like 6 seconds to go. And the promoters, to their credit, Lee Coates and Rob Braniff, said, no, this has got to go to the cards, you know. So, and I actually think the buzzer, before he could even drag me off at Prater, the buzzer had already sounded. You know what I mean? But yeah, there was definitely some home cooking in that fight. Prater was their champion, so it was kind of like a rematch. You know, I took the belt from him, immediate rematch type situation. And I felt it was a big enough show that, and it was a really good regional show at that time.
Oh, for sure. I got it on DVD. Yeah.
I felt like as their champion, you know, I should fight whoever they put across from me.
Okay. Well, so you were, okay. All right. So fair enough. Now from there, what I really enjoyed was, well, when you're from a certain region, unless you're from California, because us Midwest guys kind of feel like those California people get a lot handed to them. Like there's a lot of nerf coding when it comes to bringing their fighters up. And I'm not disparaging their toughness or their skill level or anything like that. It's just like things seem easier when you're from that side of the country, rather than if you're, you know, Keith, you're driving all over the Midwest, you know, trying to get a fight. And at this point, you get called up to the UFC, and the fight, because the way you had been kind of maneuvering in terms of your fights, you and Nick Thompson were on a collision course. And I thought I was going to see it locally somewhere, and it was just going to be awesome because I was going to be ringside for it. And it got pulled to the UFC. So how does the call to the UFC come about? And were you surprised that Nick Thompson was going to be your opponent?
But Nick Thompson wasn't my original opponent. So okay. I wasn't, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say.
Who was the original, surprised. You remember?
So it was Joe Riggs.
Okay.
I was scheduled to fight Joe Riggs, and Matt Hughes was scheduled to fight. God, I can't for the life of me, I can't remember who Matt Hughes was scheduled to fight.
Carl Parisian.
You might be right. I bet you're right about that. So anyhow, that fight. Actually, I don't think so, because that might have been. I think that was pre-Caro. I don't think Caro was in the UFC yet.
He was.
Yeah. You might be right. You may well be right. Anyways, if Riggs stepped up and took that fight on kind of, you know, not crazy short notice, but like 2 weeks notice.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up fighting Thompson.
Was there a difference in pay, or did he just say, hey, you're fighting Nick Thompson? Like, what?
2-2 was kind of the standard at that point. At least to my knowledge, for like a debut.
Entry level, yeah.
Yeah, unless you were like connected or, you know, had a really big name from some other organization. If you just fought your way up to the ranks, that's kind of what so that's what I was getting.
Was it difficult fighting somebody that you guys obviously had seen each other fight at least a half dozen times live a piece in your UFC debut? Was that a difficult task?
No, you know, Nick and I were friends. We had trained together, actually. We trained together after that fight. Still, I mean, it's been years ago, but Nick actually came to Duneland after he retired. So he had been, you know, he's a lawyer then, you know, he hadn't fought in years, and he came and trained with us. So, but throughout my career, I fought a fair amount of people that, you know, maybe not like close friends, but, you know, guys that I had a ton of respect for, you know, guys that I would consider, and Nick was one of them. Nick was a friend, you know, but it's not a big deal. It's just a sport. You're just competing against you know, another guy across the cage from you.
Yeah, that whole Wisconsin scene, there was a lot of characters there. You know, Brian Garrity, Pat O'Malley, Ron Faircloth, Jamil Massou. I mean, there's you know, a lot of talent up there. A lot of talent in Wisconsin.
I was real guys. I mean, I was really good friends with Strasser, and then Strasser promoted a show, and so Duneland guys, a lot of the Duneland guys kind of cut their chops up there on Strasser's show. So, yeah, I really like that whole crew.
Yeah, that was part. I mean, you know, when you go down, even start, you know, from the early days with the Florida show and the AFC, when you go down there, and you know, you got Strasser's, he's got guys on the show fighting ATT guys and stuff. You guys start to circle the wagons and make like a team kind of thing. So yeah, there was a lot of camaraderie.
Yeah, we kind of had a joke. We were the Midwest top team, down there challenging the American top team. So yeah, I mean, they weren't actually Duneland guys, and we weren't actually Strasser guys, but they were about as close as you could be to a teammate down there.
Yeah, I agree. And Keith, at those AFC shows, yeah, I'm glad we're kind of retouching on this, so I don't have to backtrack on a question. On those AFC shows, Wade Rome and Din Thomas were doing color commentary, and Din and Wade would use that opportunity to be like, it's, their time at the Chuckle Hut, and they would work out their materials, and they would concentrate on anybody from the Midwest, whether you looked funny or they didn't like your haircut or your type of shorts. And they were real kind of like high school snobby, just kind of jerks on the color commentary. And Nick Thompson stood up to Din Thomas and wouldn't allow him to continue disrespecting anybody from the Midwest, and was very vocal about, no, I'm fighting you next, Din. No, I've heard what you said. And it was kind of like, it made me happy. I'm not even working out with any of you guys. And I'm like, get up, Nick. Whether he won or lost, at least, he's confronting someone that's embarrassing somebody on DVD. Did you ever experience those sidebar comments from either of those two?
Well, I mean, they did the commentary for me and Santiago, and they were pretty dismissive of me. I mean, in all fairness, he won the first 2 rounds pretty one-sidedly, but they're American top team guys. Din Thomas was basically a trainer at that point. I mean, he was still fighting, but he was one of the head trainers, so
he's still over there, I think. Oh, no, he left as well.
He left.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, he's the color commentary for all his teammates. It's not shocking that the commentary is a little biased, I
wouldn't say it was a little biased. It was kind of mean. It was intentionally mean.
I think it's kind of funny. It actually gets a chuckle.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, that's Keith. That's Keith. Yeah.
I bleed a lot, but I got thick skin.
That's cool. Fair enough. All right. So now we're revisiting BoDog, even though this is your first time fighting for them. And you fight Jorge Masvidal in a
I've heard of him.
Controversial, in my opinion, it was a controversial loss.
I would think most people would think that. I mean, if you watch the fight, I would assume you'd think it's controversial. I don't have any doubt that I won that fight. There's quite a few fights in my career that were really close, split decision losses, could have went either way. I don't think that was one of those fights. I'm pretty sure I won that fight. But judges gave it to him, so I can't say a whole lot about it other than, I've rewatched that fight probably 4 or 5 times, just especially with him having all that success. I kind of curious just to go back to see how we did against each other, and I'm pretty sure I should have won that fight.
So you're checking all the boxes years later going, yep.
Miguel was cage side, and I think me and Justin both give him kind of dirty look when they read George's name. So yeah, I thought I won that fight.
Now, how was dealing with him going up until that fight? Did he have the same persona as now, or was it a little more relaxed, amped up? How was he at that point?
I don't really care for the guy. That's probably that's really the only fighter I can think of in my career that I really dislike. There's a few guys that were kind of cold shoulder to you a little bit, not friendly. So it's not that they're, being rude to you, but they don't want to talk. They're not wanting to give hugs after the fight. They're just go in there, do their job and get out. And they don't want any more to do with you, which is fine. But he's really the only guy I fought that was really disrespectful, cocky in the ring, showboating, trash talking before. And it just, to me, and I know
if I'm not mistaken, he fought your brother too, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
He won that was another fight that probably easily could have been a draw, even though Jorge got the better of the fight. Undoubtedly Jorge got the better of that fight. But the first round, I think Justin may have edged him out, and Jorge dominated the second round, and it was a 2-round fight. So yeah, he's got 2 wins over the Wisniewski brothers.
Do you recall any of the things that he was saying to you pre-fight that kind of rubbed you wrong?
it wasn't just me. I'd been around him, seen him fight other places. He trash talks a lot. I was there with a girl came down there with me. He was blowing kisses to her, before the fight stuff. Just,
no.
I mean, it's kind of hard to explain. For me, I like playing sports, and MMA is a sport. I'm going to be 40 here in a few months, and I still like going out and playing basketball or football. But, you get those guys that make it personal. They're, it's a little bit, it's fun to have a little friendly trash talk, and you want to be competitive. But he was kind of like that, like a Tito Ortiz type, played a character, you know what I mean? And he made it always trying to showboat and be center of attention. And I just don't care for that personality. And it's not as fun for me to compete. Like Steve Berger, I fought, earlier in my career, and I'd been around Steve a lot. We'd fought on a ton of cards together. We sat in the locker room and talked to each other for like 2 hours before we fought. I mean, we're wrapping our hands sitting next to each other at a table.
Good guy. Yeah.
A real good guy. And then probably 15 minutes before the bell's going to ring, I'm like, hey, Steve, I'm going to go back to my locker room, but really nice talking to you. Good luck out there. And most of my fights were like that, and I'll go out there and fight as hard as I can till the bell rings. And then after the fight, we usually go have a beer. I wouldn't want to have a beer with Santiago or Masvidal. Just,
all right.
Yeah.
So if I could play like devil's advocate in regards to, like, I've never met the guy. I don't know him. But he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he publicly stated that if there was one fight that he believes he lost, that he got a decision on, and he said it was yours. Does that surprise you?
A little bit, because it kind of goes counter to my impression of him, that, even if he thought, because he acted, he celebrated like he just won the Super Bowl and we fought, he could barely stand, but he acted like he knew he won the fight. So it does surprise me. I respect the guy quite a bit as a fighter. I mean, even
you have to. Yeah.
Even in his early, that was pretty early in our careers. He was a real hard-nosed guy. He had quick hands. I don't think he had a wrestling background, but he developed kind of like me. He learned to wrestle. He became a really good wrestler. He's got an exciting style. He doesn't get tired. So on a fighter level, I really respect the guy, but yeah, I'm just not into that pro wrestling personality for MMA. I don't like people who are real braggadocious. I don't like, I've seen him fight a few guys that he was a lot better than, and he really played it up. And I don't know. I mean, if that's your thing, that's fine. But
yeah, that's cool. Well, he did mention it. They mentioned about BoDog on the Joe Rogan Experience, which, I mean, there couldn't be a bigger platform to talk about.
Oh yeah.
How could he not be? And he literally mentioned that he didn't think he won. So, to play that devil's advocate, like everything you said, I mean, you're not going to disagree with it, but to his credit, he also believes you won that fight as well. So did you ever think that certain camps may target you? Like they may see your look, see the way you fight, and just like, nope, keep sending guys at him, because your third Russian Red Devil was Eric Oganov.
I'm trying to think if there's ever been a situation where I think I was really targeted by a team, and nothing's jumping out at me. That Oganov fight is just kind of a coincidence. So I think when Masvidal...
How sure are you of that?
I'm not positive, but I would say 99%. So
pretty positive.
Yeah. So Masvidal was supposed to do that fight. The winner of me and Masvidal was supposed to represent like Team USA against Team Russia, because that's how that show was set up. And for whatever reason, Masvidal couldn't do the Oganov fight. I don't know if he was injured or why he couldn't travel to Canada, but he couldn't take the fight. And because I think a lot of people thought I won anyways, I was kind of a natural pick to replace him. So I don't really think Red Devil's like, hey, we want this guy. It's just that Oganov was already in that slot, and I was chosen to fill it.
Yeah, and he's going back to his camp going, man, okay, we got this guy again.
Yeah, George, we couldn't get George into Canada because of outstanding arrest warrant or something, in his criminal background or something like that. everything could be overcome, but when it came as a surprise, we weren't going to take the risk. They were turning people back there, so that's why George should make his leap to superstardom at that point. Yeah,
I kind of knew that, but I figured that was his. You know, I didn't want to put it out there for everybody.
Not gonna throw him under the bus like that.
Yeah.
So
the best thing that can happen to us in this interview is for him to shit all over us for revealing that and tell people to come look at it.
Yeah, true. So Keith, why do you fight Carlo Prater a third time after being like hometown, like so bad in that second fight?
I wasn't hometown in the second fight.
Well, you were almost. They attempted it.
No, that was the first fight. The second fight.
Keep up,
Second fight was in Las Vegas, and it was kind of a boring. You know, it was a one-sided fight. I got the better of him. I won all 3 rounds, but mostly kind of a slow, grinding fight. You know, the third fight was pretty similar. It wasn't really a barn burner. You know.
So he finally gets his win over you.
Yeah. Split decision, but yeah, he got the nod.
Did you feel that he won that fight?
You know, there's a fair amount of fights in my career that were really close that I think could have went either way. I think that falls into that category where, you know, especially in a fight where you don't feel you fought very well. Like, I get the feeling he probably feels the same. Like, it just wasn't a great performance by either of us. We were pretty tight, you know, a lot of holding, you know, just wasn't a great fight. It's kind of hard to look back on a fight that's slow, you know, not a ton of shots landed, and then complain about a close decision. I mean,
so why did you agree to fight him a third time, out of curiosity?
So I think I got like 15 grand or something for that fight, you know, which, you know, at the time,
funny,
pretty substantial payday. I know that's not a huge payday nowadays, but you know, at that time it was pretty substantial to me. So
more than the UFC was paying.
Good.
Yeah. And it was a really good card. I mean, Pedro Hizzo fought Jeff Munson on the main event of that card. I mean, it was a really stacked card. You know, I'm trying to remember who else was on it, and it was on pay-per-view. I mean, it was, you know, to me, it was a good opportunity, even though it was a fight that, you know, it was a third time fighting him. And it was at, where did we fight? We fought at the Dallas Mavericks Stadium. So it's kind of a cool venue.
Nice.
It was on pay-per-view. I bought that. Yeah. Wow.
Keith, you talking about there, you know, these close decisions, and I'm sure you've done judging sometimes now. It's just going there when you got 2 guys and it's a close fight, not a lot happens. Man, it's hard to pick, you know. You're like,
yeah.
But decisions are going to happen a lot. I get it. You know, it's happened to me, and you're pissed at the time. You go back and you watch it later on, like, you know, what are you going to do, man?
That's kind of how I feel. There's a fair amount of fights where I can kind of shrug and say, yeah, I wish that had gone my way. I sure would have liked to got the win money instead of the show money, but it's really hard, especially in a couple of the fights where I'm almost embarrassed about how I fought. It's hard to feel that way, and then at the same time throw a big stink about not getting the decision.
Okay. So you suffer your 4th loss in a row at this point, and you suffer your 4th loss in a row when you make your IFL debut against Rory Markham in a fight that you were definitely winning.
Yeah, I took that on relatively short notice as well. It wasn't a great experience for me. I mean, that was my only IFL fight, and I liked the concept of it, but I think it worked better for, like, say, the Bettendorf team, the Iowa team, because those guys were all actually teammates, and Miletich was their coach. Most of the teams were just kind of, you know, I guess the Team Quest team out in Portland was kind of like those guys were teammates and they had their cornermen cornering them. But most of the teams were just kind of put together, you know, guys that trained from all different camps, all different places, and they fought for a team. I had Carlos Newton in my corner, and I think I met him the day of the weigh-ins or the day before weigh-ins. They didn't fly a corner out there, so I took it on short notice, and I have to cut to 170. I don't have a corner with me. I didn't have anyone with me to cut the weight. So that was really hard. I mean, I would say hard to the point of being dangerous. You know, I was close to passing out in the sauna, and I'm by myself. So just an all around, not a great experience. It was a pretty good fight. You know, I got the better, pretty one-sided first 2 rounds, and then he clipped me pretty good in the third. Maybe I actually think he clipped me really good at the end of the second. And then he really put it on me pretty good in the third. It was a really one-sided round, and they scored the third at 10-8, I guess. Ended up being a draw, and because they're scoring it by team, the draws have to go like to an overtime round, and I couldn't come out for an overtime. I was done.
Wow. So, Chris, when you get 4 losses in a row against real high competition too, so it's not like, he's punching down and losing fights. Some would argue he's punching up and losing fights at this point. Most pros would either start phoning it in and just collecting paydays and riding out or trips or vacations. But that's not what Keith Wisniewski is. He actually rattles off 6 wins in a row. 2 people that were on the UFC, they were UFC veterans, and another 2 that were on the UFC short list. It was pretty impressive, Keith. It was pretty impressive just how you never stopped.
Yeah, I didn't really get discouraged with those losses. Like I said, a few of those I felt like, for sure the Masvidal I felt like was a win, so even though that's officially a loss on my record, it's not like I felt like I lost 4 fights in a row. I felt like I won 1, had a couple that were super close, could have went my way, went the other way, and then maybe lost 1. So, but it was never I don't think I'm good enough. I can't compete at this. It's just make adjustments, get better, and come back. And I enjoyed competing. So I really enjoyed training, like being part of a team. And I didn't really want to give that up. So if you're going to train as hard as I train, it's kind of hard not to have the payoff of fighting at that point.
Keith, I wonder if you think kind of similar. It sounds like you do like me. Like I've lost several split decisions. And, at some point I decided I don't really care what 3 individuals think about what I just did, because especially most of the time, those 3 people never even fought. I don't care what 3 people who've never fought before. And I know if I won or lost, or I know how I feel about what I did. You never think you did enough, but how you did. I don't really care what they say, because at the end of the day, that's not what's important. It sucks for the pay, but I try never to let that bother me one way or another. It sounds like what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I never got super discouraged about it. Yeah, it sucked for the pay. It also sucked for like future opportunities. You know what I mean? It's you sort of got to walk that ladder up unless you're really connected. And those were major setbacks for my career. And a couple of those go my way, it could have really affected the way my career went, I feel like. But it definitely wasn't something I beat myself up about or dwelled on. For me, I really enjoyed training. And if you're going to train that hard and you're going to stay in shape, you want to kind of have some target you're getting ready for. And that's just kind of how I lived my life for about 20 years, 15, 20 years, that next target, that next fight,
Yep.
Well, Keith finished his career in the UFC. Josh Neer was one of my favorite fights. And I thought he was starting to bend at the time that they had stopped the fight for a cut against you. I thought you were starting to kind of turn the corner with that fight.
I suspect I wouldn't have finished him. I might have stolen the 3rd round from him. I probably had a little bit of momentum. I clipped him with a really nice elbow in the 2nd that hurt him. But it was kind of for people who watched the fight, his mouthpiece fell out and it fell in like a gap in the octagon. So we had like a 1.5-minute pause while they tried to find that. I think they actually made the two mouthpiece rule after that. So if someone gets their mouthpiece knocked out, the corner can just give them the next one. But I was complaining a lot in that fight when they stopped it. For people who haven't seen it, it was a doctor stoppage. I was yelling at the doctor and yelling at the ref, and Justin was really aggressively yelling at the doctor. She came in, or I think it was a female doctor. I can't remember for sure, but the referee called the doctor in, and they checked on me in the 2nd round and let me continue. And then between the 2nd and 3rd round, they call the doctor in again, and the doctor gets like 1 step through the door and probably like 10, 12 foot away from me still, and waves the fight off. And I'm like, what? I could see I'm fine. Let me fight. And me and Justin we're screaming. I'm giving her the stink eye pretty good. But in retrospect, I took, I don't know, 40-ish stitches. I took 4 staples. They had to stitch the inside of my mouth. They had to stitch both eyes. They had to stitch under. I mean, I'm still pretty scarred up from that fight. So
Jesus.
I'm not sure eating any more of those elbows was really in my best interest, you know. So sometimes fighters don't have their own best interest in mind. And I think that was one of those moments where in the moment I'm heated, I'm complaining. You know, you could see I'm mad when they stopped it. I mean, I was gracious. I really respect Josh, and I thought he fought a great fight, but I wanted to continue. But I think it was probably the right move to stop the fight.
So Keith, earlier you had talked about concussions. Have those affected you? Like, do you feel the effects of them, or do you believe that you've had some issues later on with those?
Not really. You know, nothing noticeable, to be honest. I mean, I know that I've had a ton of concussions, and I feel that as my fight career got farther and farther along, I was more concussion prone, so it was harder to compete. You know, there have been fights where I got concussions like in the first round, and I fought through it, but I didn't have the coordination. You know, my body just didn't do the things I wanted to do anymore. So in that sense, it affected me, but like behaviorally, or I don't feel like I've experienced what other people have in that sense. But it's definitely, from the time I first got in the sport, the knowledge on concussions has expanded a lot. I mean, there were definitely instances where I got 2 or 3 concussions like in the same day. And
Jesus.
People didn't really, I don't feel like people understood the idea of, you know, compounding concussions where you should take 2 weeks off and not do contact. You know, it'd be one of those, you shake it off, you know, you get your bell rung, get back out there. And I think expanding knowledge, like especially through football, expanding knowledge on the dangers of concussions is kind of, you know, as a coach, by the time I was coaching fighters to a large extent, we took a lot better care of them than I took care of myself.
Huh. Have you seen anybody from the local region that have talked to you about concussions? Because I have.
No, not really, to be honest.
Yeah, I've talked to Brian Garrity about it. You know, he says that he's struggling a little bit. He was on The Ultimate Fighter.
Right.
Ron Faircloth, obviously. I mean, he's no longer with us. You know, he struggled quite a bit and was tortured, you know, with you know, depression and memory issues. And, you know, he's no longer with us. But there's quite a few, man. There's quite a few.
You know, my memory's weird. I have some things. I mean, I can remember a million different song lyrics, but I'll forget everyone's name that I ever meet. So, you know, whether that's or just my personality, it's hard to say.
Do you read a lot?
Quite a bit, yes.
See, I think you're also performing those mental exercises, because when Keith and I would be promoting shows together, and we did it, you know, maybe a dozen at the most, he'd be sitting with a book in his hand. And Keith, I'm going to be real honest with you, that not only like inspired me, but even till today, I still read. Like, I've got books that I'm reading. You know, I don't read every single day, but I definitely do. And I exercise my mind, and largely in part, that's from you. And I'm constantly, like, I always have a book with me, whether it's in my bag or in my car. I always have a book.
Yeah, I like to read. And I also games, you know, mental games, chess, cards. You know, I'd say I keep my brain active. I try to, at least.
Yeah. So let's talk about,
like, your brother he like hit on the pachinko machines in Japan, and if I remember correctly, he has like he's got that like math like genius kind of thing going. So you guys used to like do challenge, like sitting there like puzzle challenges, like these guys are on a bus like sitting there like talking, you know, okay, multiply. I can't even remember exactly the detail, but it's definitely higher math.
We were probably the only guys in the UFC locker room with a chessboard set up, because it's you got to kill a lot of time at those events, so you got to do something.
Yeah. So, you know, for those that don't know, Duneland Valley Tudo, which was Keith's gym, at one point,
Justin's gym as much as mine.
Well, here, okay, the Wisniewski brothers gym. Okay, that's fair. I apologize. That's true. That's true. Because I know Justin did a lot of the work and training regimens, and
really, he was the head trainer. So I was the head manager. I managed the guys, and Justin was the main trainer. He was the head corner man. So it was our gym together. We owned it together. But if you had to say who was the head trainer, it was undoubtedly him.
That's awesome. So I like to kind of just look at, and there's going to be some people that leave off of this list, but I'm just like looking at the people that received a UFC or Strikeforce or Bellator contract from your gym. And it's pretty impressive. Like sometimes gyms, even in like big metropolitan areas, if they can get one guy to the UFC, it's like, it's the cornerstone of that coach, of that coach's life. And when you look at what you've done from like a relatively rural area of Northwest Indiana, you got John Colossi, Darren Elkins, Eddie Wineland, Josh Shockley, and Mark Birch. I don't know if I'm leaving anybody out from there, but this is all homegrown talent that both, that your brother and yourself both developed, in a garage and made it to the big show. And two of which, I mean, look at Darren Elkins and Eddie Wineland are still making a name for themselves. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of what we did as a gym. I'm biased, obviously, but I thought we were one of the best, or maybe the best gym in Chicago for a time. I think undoubtedly the best in Northwest Indiana at a time. I think we did it mostly just through, I think our workouts are more intense than most other gyms. I mean, by the end of our workout, the room was like 90 degrees and there'd be like a quarter inch of water on the ground, because there was that much sweat.
It's not water.
Not water. But, we were in a wrestling town. Portage is a wrestling town. And we got a lot of really elite wrestlers to come in. And we just it was almost like a college wrestling room's mindset where it's just a lot of really high level athletes competing against each other. And it kind of fed and built. And then fighters, guys who were good athletes would see the success. And then, they wanted to be part of that. So yeah, for a while there, I really think we were a pretty elite gym. And it's nice to see a few of the guys still making like an actual living. Like they're going to probably retire as fighters, maybe not have to do a day job afterwards.
And I was always real proud of, you guys were from Indiana, and I know you guys, and, just not that you were just from here, but the way you guys fought, just a tough, gritty style, especially like a Darren Elkins. I remember watching him and telling people, no, watch this guy. He said, even if he's losing, he's going to grind it out. He's done that so many times where he's losing the first round, the second round just sticks to it. Just that tough, gritty, like blue collar worker, which was what you guys were. So I kind of loved having that. That's my favorite kind of style, and you guys are right there. It's pretty awesome.
We kind of felt the same about Integrated. I mean, there was
Thank you.
There. So you guys definitely had the same reputation.
Good. Yeah, that's my favorite reputation. That's the kind of gym we wanted to be. So you guys were that, and like those are my Indiana guys. Killed. I love it.
Darren Elkins copied your head movement style like to a T.
Yeah, we're not very graceful fighters.
No, but you got. I mean, the thing is that's what Chris is talking about. Is like put your head down and just move forward, and that's
bite down the mouthpiece.
That makes for a lot of excitement and stuff like that. But yeah, you're not you're not going to be confused with Floyd Mayweather.
No, I think that's a fair statement. Fair statement.
Well, Keith, man, thank you so much for joining us. And, I also like to think that never mind like all the accomplishments of yourselves and your teammates. I think your biggest accomplishment, or your brothers, the gym's biggest accomplishment is taking people off of the streets. Like some of the guys from your gym, some of the guys that are from kind of adverse backgrounds, they go to a gym where they kind of, let that person act out or act crazy, talk whichever way they want. And they go, hey, well, that's just him. When one of those people showed up over at Duneland, you guys had like a tight leash around them. Like, no, you're going to handle yourself like us. Like you're going to walk the walk and you're going to talk the talk. And, one of those guys that stands out is Mark Birch. I mean, Mark Birch has done time in prison. And when you talk to Mark, it's like, well, when I went to Europe this time, I really liked how, socially speaking, this took place and the government worked that way. And I have no doubt, and I throw Mark's name out there without real care, because I know Mark doesn't mind, but I think you guys, in Mark's case, turned his entire life around. And that's just one of many, many examples of the people that walk through your gym. Like your biggest win, your gym's biggest win is, I think, the community, what you guys have done for it, at least on a local level.
We're definitely a tight-knit group. You cited a guy like Birch, and I think we did a lot for Birch, but those are, a guy like Birch or Darren or Josh. These guys were coaches at the gym. They were leaders, and they did that for other people, so it was all those people put in probably more than they took out from the gym. But yeah, I think there's a fair amount of people, and we weren't really open to everyone. We switched to a tryout system because we really didn't want people who weren't willing to work. You didn't have to be a great athlete, but you had to be willing to work as hard as we worked.
Nice.
But as long as you had that effort, you were welcome at our gym, and you were going to train right along with, there were guys in the UFC. You could come in your first day and be thrown into that line as long as you're willing to go as hard as you can, and I think that sort of the type of person that can persevere through that is going to improve from that, socially, improve athletically. They're going to make tight bonds and friendships. And to this day, those are my best friends, some of my old teammates. Those are the guys I stay in touch with. And I think with each other as well, all those guys still have a pretty tight kinship.
The UFC did Birch wrong, dude.
I wish Mark had fought in the UFC.
Well, explain the situation so people understand what took place with him.
So I was managing Mark at the time, and he was signed to fight. I can't think of the guy's name, but he's a really good, Dutch kickboxer. I think he's Dutch. Do you guys remember the name offhand? He had a decent UFC career.
Not Struve.
No, it was way before that.
Oh, so you're not talking, what's his name? Come on, the 7-foot guy? No,
before him too.
Sammy Schultz? Before? No.
Okay. Pancreas and stuff.
It's not going to come to me, but he was fighting a pretty decorated striker who was scheduled to fight. And he was a little slow getting his medicals done for the fight. And I was managing him, and I don't want to go into details, but I had some personal stuff going on at that point. And I didn't do the best job managing him. And I think it's fair. I don't think he would criticize me for this. It was just a tough situation. But we found out late that if you're over 40, you had to do all these extra medicals. So it was kind of like one of those, he got his done, but they got him done the last minute. And then Joe Silva called, and he's like, hey, he's over 40. He's got to do all this other stuff to fight Nevada. So Birch went out and did it all, really fast at that point. He had been kind of dragging his feet, but he got him done in a 48-hour period. But Joe would, by the time I sent him in to Joe, he said, hey, I've already replaced him. We're going to cancel his contract. So, it's a shame the guy that fought his way up and earned that chance never got to compete at that level. But some of it was his fault for dragging his feet. Some of it was my fault for not being more on top of it. Some of it was the UFC's fault for not, hey, we'll give you, even if we can't do this one, let's do it the next one. But you can't fault them. Everyone and their brother wants to fight on that show. They don't want to fight getting canceled last minute. So it's a shame that he didn't get that fight. That's a huge regret for me personally. I'm sure it's a huge regret for him, but to say the UFC did him dirty or did something wrong, I think that's a little unfair, to criticize them for that too. It's just the way things worked out.
Well, I think under those circumstances, I think you hit it right on the head. They're going to do what they have to do, and business-wise, you can see their point. But there is an aspect of, put them on the next show. You know what I mean? It's like, what's the problem?
He has medicals.
Everything's set now. It's like, so you put him on the next show. There was no reason to really cancel it, except for, I guess, when you're heading towards a 600-man roster, you got to send messages at certain points, right? So it's unfortunate to be caught up in that.
Yeah, for people who haven't got a chance to see him fight, you know, and most people probably haven't, he was a incredibly exciting fighter. I mean,
He
just a
was
hard
so
nose.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't really, like, because I had him as a promoter on a few of my cards that I promoted. You couldn't book a better guy. You know, his fights were all barn burners. I mean, he was good at everything. He was athletic for a big guy. He had a big personality. So, yeah, I mean, he was a fantastic fighter. I wish he had gotten a chance to showcase himself on a bigger level.
Yeah, him and that Adam Majewski was one of the best live fights I've ever seen.
That was on my card. That was I think that was actually believe it or not, the co-main event that night. But man, that was a good fight.
Are you sure? That was the Duneland Classic 1, baby. I remember that. I think I still got the ticket for it.
It was Duneland Classic 2. So
was it 2? Okay.
Birch was the main event of the first show I ever promoted. Was Duneland.
Was
Classic
outside.
1, and it was an all amateur show. And he fought Warren Kikapa, one of Strasser's guys, as our main amateur main event. But I feel like maybe that Majewski fight was the main event. I can't remember, but it was definitely it was an amazing fight. Those two went to war.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun.
Cool.
So that's the story with Birch, huh? I remember Birch in BoDog, and he fought Rinaldi, one of the top teams guys. And this is funny because they were in Costa Rica. I think Keith, you weren't at you were with him, right?
Yeah, I fought Masvidal.
Oh, so this was okay. All right, good. So that was that card. I do remember you there now. I'm sorry, but so Birch is huge, right? He's got a cut to make 265, right?
Yeah.
And you know
he's a pocket fighter though. Like he stays in the pocket and throws, man.
But guys like Wisniewski and you know a lot of the Americans weight cutting, they're already at a pro level of weight cutting, so they got their plan and they got everything set. But in the United States, that generally means a sauna. Now, in Costa Rica, they don't have sauna in this hotel. It's a very nice hotel, but no sauna because the whole country's a sauna, right? You don't really
Go outside.
No one's going to go sit in a hot room in this country, right? So Birch took a porta potty and let it bake in the hot sun on a clay tennis court. And he would sit in that porta potty to cut weight.
Oh, I don't remember that. I'm gonna have to ask him about that. That's funny.
Yeah, no, ask him about that, man.
Hopefully nobody used it.
Birch is one of those guys that, you know, he said big personality and stuff like that. Nicest guy you ever meet, except for on weighing day. Not a nice guy at all on weighing day, not cool.
He's pretty grumpy on weighing days, and he
I
had a really
would say he's somebody you ought to be careful of. You know,
Yeah,
you definitely want to be nice to him. That's all I would
Yes. At times he really struggled to make 65, and I think that was to his detriment. I would think when he was at like 160 or 260, he was like a perfect athlete. But when he got up to like 290 and had to cut to make 265, he was a little more sluggish. And as Miguel said, kind of moody at the weigh-ins.
But definitely fun stuff. So I remember too. That post fight party at BoDog was fun because I remember you sitting there because you'll have a beer or two, but we were watching like Dave Strasser dance off with the Japanese judge guy that was there, and it was really funny because the production crew was like, "Oh, they're so drunk, and it's like
Dave
the Japanese guy is drunk as shit. Dave had that alcohol in like 20 years, you know what I mean? Never.
That's just him.
My favorite fight, post-fight memories was at the Trump Taj Mahal shows. I felt those were an awesome time. We'd all set up in that main lobby bar, and it was kind of that same crew of guys, you know, without the BoDog pomp, you know, because then you had kind of the production BoDog people, but they weren't there at that time. So it's just all the people I really liked, and it was just a perfect bar, perfect atmosphere. I miss those shows.
Yeah, that BoDog, that was Trump Taj Mahal, right? And now the guy is a former president. So it's been a long time, Keith. Definitely been a long time. Thank you for catching up. I know we're trying to wrap up here, but I don't know.
I think we're like over an hour and a half in. So
I think we're like 2 hours, aren't we?
Are we 2 hours?
Yeah.
Well, those 50 Fight Club members, we got to go
50
every
fights.
fight.
Got to go over them all.
I don't get to see you guys too often, so I'm kind of enjoying it. I got to be honest.
No,
Yeah,
good,
Keith, man, I got a world of respect for you, man. Like, forget the fight game, just as a person. You and I worked together. Everything you ever said you would do, you did. Any expectation I had for you to complete, you never let me down. And like, I always felt like, damn, man, it was truly an honor, like to work with somebody such as yourself. And, you know, like I was kind of, I'm a little older than the guy, yet the responsibility that Keith has taken on is, you know, not just with us as a promotion, but you know, with your gym and your brother and managing guys. It was very, very impressive, man. And I'd say thank you for allowing me to have those experiences with you.
That was a pleasure, brother. It really was.
Yeah, it's been about a decade, man. It's been about 10 years. Yeah.
You gotta, when we do this next time, you gotta bust Justin out because
come on, bro.
I think it's been a long time, right? And Justin didn't have the UFC, you know, at the end of his career kind of thing. But I think you're right, and you were very obviously honorable in you know, giving Justin his right. But back in the early days, the Wisniewskis were a 1-2 punch, bro.
Yeah. How many fights does Justin have? He's got to have about 40 fights, right?
Yeah, I would say in that ballpark, maybe mid-30s.
Yeah, I don't think he's 50 Fight Club because he stopped and he concentrated on the gym.
A lot of those fights, like those early fights where I'm fighting every month. I mean, we're not talking about, but almost every one of those fights, Justin would corner me, and I would whoever had to fight first, the guy who had to fight after, kind of a disadvantage because he'd be cornering, running back to try to warm up for his fight. But yeah, we cornered each other for really Justin. The fights where Justin wasn't in my corner is probably like maybe 10 fights. I mean, they're real distinctive because he's not in my corner. And I remember him in my corner for pretty much all my fights. And he was about as good as you could get. You know, he was a guy that coached the ref really well. I don't know if you're kind of familiar with that, but like he would give you advice, but it would be meant for the ref. Like if a ref was getting agitated for stand up or something, like he'd really exaggerate, like big shots, you're doing great work in there. You know, the ref would kind of do a second take and then kind of back off a little bit. And he just knew how to work the judges as a corner man. I mean, he just a lot of subtle things that you don't really think about. He was a special corner man. I think he was as good as anyone I've been around.
That's awesome.
Nice.
That's cool. Yeah, that's definitely that bond. It's like you don't meet guys with a bond like that. The brothers, they actually shared the same nickname. And you haven't talked about when you came out to Do You Really Want to Hurt Me either. Come on, man.
I don't think I ever came out to that one.
Who was it? Was that your brother then?
Right, Nick Thompson, probably.
It was. I think it might have been Nick Thompson.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
Nick came out to that?
It's pretty funny.
I thought you came out to that. No?
Never me. No.
You know, maybe Noble, too.
Who, me?
Noble came out when I fought Noble. I came out to, and I thought it was pretty cool. I came out to, God, I can't think of his name. The guy that sings Brown Eyed Girl, Van Morrison. I came out to Into the Mystic, which I think was a good entrance song. He came out to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Relax, and he just totally went up me, you know.
Yeah,
it was well played on his part.
He took an L. He took an L on the entrance music.
Yeah, I won the fight, but I think he won the real battle.
Oh, good. Starting off 0-1, you know.
Yeah, I think Justin used Uncle John's band one time.
Yeah, that was down in Evansville. I stole it all. I used it later, but yeah, that was a really good entrance.
Dude, I love the Grateful Dead, man. I've probably seen them live at least 40 times. I was at Bob Weir's show when it got canceled for COVID. It was like I was supposed to go both nights. I'm a huge Deadhead, man. I love the Grateful Dead.
Me as well. And I really came out to. If I ever came out of retirement, it's because I got like 30 more songs I want to come out to. Because that was a big thing for me and Justin. We think funny. A lot about what mood we were in song wise, and a little bit of classic rock and quite a bit of country. A little, kind of mixed it up.
Yeah, but it's not like your radio country. It's the old school traditional country like George Jones, which I also am a fan of that style of music. I had Chris trapped in a car with me all the way down to Birmingham, and I'm like, dude, sorry, brother, we're doing outlaw country the whole way.
Yeah, but we were doing 110, so it went pretty fast.
Yeah. So anyway, Keith, Chris, you want to lead us out of here? We
hey, yeah, once again, man, 50 Fight Club member. Keith Wisniewski, just one of the old school guys. I love his career, and that's what real fighting is. People don't understand that nowadays. It's a different breed, but the thing that made me fall in love with the sport was people like this and this type of career. So just can't thank you enough for sharing that with people. Glad everybody got to hear it. And hey, man, thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit.
It was a pleasure, man. Really good to talk to all three of you.
Cool.
Have fun, Keith. Thank you very much, dude.
Take care, brother.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.